welcome in the new Daoland healthcare video. Today we are going to talk about the Daodejing. The Daodejing is one of the most translated books in the world. It's a real religious book, spiritual book, and we're going to explain a little bit today, talk a little bit about what the Daodejing is about, why it is an important book, who was the writer, and so forth and so forth. So I hope you're going to enjoy this video and you are going to enjoy the story that I weave around it. Because I think the Daodejing is a very interesting book. I have so far neglected talking about this book in my channel, but seeing all the different kind of versions of discussion about it that are missing the most essential points, I thought it is high time to do so. In the meantime, when you like my videos, please send me a like on this video and make sure that you also join the video if you haven't done yet. It would be really great if you would join our classes, or if you would sign up for one of the workshops, or if you just sponsor the videos so that I can keep on making these videos and help finding the funds eventually to find the larger audience for these movies, because I know the audience is there because of all the remarks that I get about my videos, but I don't have the funds to make sure that they can see it. And the Google algorithm is, as a demon is, not usually very helpful for new producers. I'm relatively new still, even though I'm here already a few years experimenting with how to make my stories. So let's get on with it, and we are going to start with this Daodejing thing, which is written by Lao Tzu, and many misunderstandings are there about both Lao Tzu, the history, the Daoist perception, and about how to translate these texts. So that determines already which kind of chapters we're going to divide this in. And at the end of this video, I hope have informed you a lot about this thing, and that you're going to be hyper enthusiastic about reading this text. And maybe I'm hyper enthusiastic about retranslating the text again. This is my scholarly hat. So you know that we're going to talk about some, complicated issues for which you need some background information. And I'm going to provide that today. And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. First of all, as you know, maybe, I have been translating the I Ching, and I give a I Ching course on the basis of that translation and everything that I learned from it, also from different teachers in China, in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, people who are traveling around America also, and of course the many I Ching translations that are already around and where I did or did I not agree with. When I was finished with the I Ching, I started translating the Daodejing. Of course, translating is a hugely complicated topic, and we will get back to that a little bit later. I was about halfway of the Daodejing. I was giving classes in my school every week. I would translate one Daodejing Zhang, and with this Zhang, then I would give a comment, and sometimes I would give some exercise that belonged to it, just to explain what it actually intended and what it meant in relationship to the text, and what would not be clarified by words. And I didn't realize so much at the moment when I started the Daodejing how incredibly complicated it is to translate the Daodejing, because there are two Daodejings. There is the Daodejing that is originally written, at least let's suppose that, and there's the Daodejing that is gradually reformed and reshaped and so on by Chinese history. And now we get to a point that is very important, because when I was halfway my Daodejing writing, I went with my sister Tianli Fang to Qingchen mountains. I was helped there a bit with my friend Professor Zhang, who was a teacher in the Department of Religious Studies at the Sichuan University, and we were introduced in Qingchen mountains to an abbotess, the leader basically of the nunnery, where female Daoists study and stay and reside. That is basically at the entrance of the Qingchen mountain area, and we had lovely meetings with her and talks, and we met her a few times. And one time my sister very proudly says, like, look, my brother is busy with translating the Daodejing. And the woman started laughing, and I was really looking a little bit taken aback, like, why is she laughing so much? And my sister also says, why are you laughing about that? And she teaches me one of the most important lessons about translation. She says, the Tao Te Ching is one of the most difficult texts in the world, maybe the most difficult one. Even the Heart Sutra is not as complicated as the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching may be short, but its sentences are very complicated. And Taoists spend their whole life maybe only researching one character or one sentence. And these people are Chinese. So for you as a non-Chinese, when you are not fully comprehending the nature of the language, even though your Chinese is quite okay, how do you think you can translate the Tao Te Ching if Taoists don't understand even one verse at the end of their life of study? And that was very embarrassing. So at that moment I was really shocked, of course, and I stopped working on my translation. And I never got further than 35. Then later on, when I moved, one of my discs crashed. A lot of the text got lost. I got a few printouts from a few pages left, and all the other ones were taken away by one of my assistants when she left the company. And I've never seen it back. The story is indicative of how the Tao Te Ching works. If I look at my bookshelves, I collected over 100 different kind of Tao Te Chings. They all say something different. Sometimes they're only corrections on themselves. There are a few trends in the Tao Te Ching translations that you can see, and some are radically different. Some are interpretations, some are having political interest, some have spiritual interest or shamanic or whatever kind of interest, and they translate towards an idea that they have. This item that we're now making is going to talk to you about the Tao Te Ching and all its complexity. So that means it's very complicated. I have seen many videos on the internet about the Tao Te Ching, and I must admit that none of them actually gets the point of the Tao Te Ching. All of them are based on the stereotypical ideology behind westernization of the Tao Te Ching. I have to refer here to Russell Kirkland. I don't know if you know about him. I've met him one time on a conference. Great scholar. And he said, and I agree with that, I already agreed with that before, that most of the Tao Te Ching translation are Orientalists' fantasies. And this is the best typification of the Tao Te Ching. And all the movies that you now see on the internet are Orientalist fantasies. Also, many of the people who make videos about Wudang, Wudang Mountains, Wudang Daoism, Wudang Kung Fu, when they talk about the backgrounds, usually they are fantasies. And you can't trust these texts. They help you rooting deeper into Western spirituality, but they don't help you root in Taoism. Even many of the Chinese people who came here, who teach about Taoism, they teach usually what the Chinese government prescribes. So their Taoism also has to be seen as suspect. When I was in China, if Chinese people knew I read the Tao Te Ching, they were always like, wow, because almost no Chinese person can read that or want to even read it. And nowadays Taoism is much more popular, so people try, but the language is sanitized with modern pinyin and modern Chinese simplified characters. So as a result of that, it is not exactly what it was supposed to be. Let's first talk a little bit about the language of the Tao Te Ching. The Chinese from, well, 2,500 years ago was not the same Chinese like now. The characters were at that moment largely developed, but not completely developed, and writing was still an exclusive thing. That means that if you were able to write, and even to write a book, then at that moment your capacity to speak and to write was seen as almost magic. The Tao Te Ching as such is a work of artistry where the language is passing the normalcy of daily language, and therefore you can call is highbrow Chinese. That means it is very dense, condensed, and it is very complicated, and one sentence can carry a lot of meanings. So you understand why Taoists take such a long time studying the Daodejing and not being able to finish even the study of the Daodejing and understanding it at the end of their life. So you have to be really very brilliant. I'm going to talk about a few exceptions of the rule, of course, because that's also part of it. And you might be the exception of the rule. I certainly am not. When you look at it, then with all the things that are happening with the Chinese language over time, you see that the old Chinese didn't have any interpunction, didn't have all kind of references in the words. So usually sentences were constructed in a particular kind of way where you would not see where's the beginning of the sentence, the end of the sentence, and so on and so on. It was the habit to read the text with the help of a teacher. If you didn't have a teacher, you would not be able to understand. So teachers from that time, of course, all died, and people created all kinds of interpretations. And these were to fit in with modernizations of the language. And I have to refer here to Confucius, who said, like, if you change the meaning of a character, the meaning of a word, you add to it, or you whatever you do with it, it inflates or deflates. Then at that moment, you create what we now call cultural drift, and that means that you cannot comprehend what was originally intended in the text. So that means that if you want to understand the Tao Te Ching as it was, you have to understand about the culture at that time. If you don't understand the culture about that time, you don't understand what the translation should be, and as a result of that, you also don't understand what the text wants to say to you. And the Tao Te Ching is mostly a descriptive text, and I will get back to that later on. When you look at the modernization of the text, you see that very often you start talking about opinions, commentaries, ideas of the writer who thought, like Lao Tzu probably thought this, or this is important to say. And you have therefore you have Han versions of the Tao Te Ching, you have Tang Dynasty versions, you have Song Dynasty versions, Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty versions, and so on, where there are interpretations of that. So to trust any kind of translation depends very much on which interpretation was used at the foundation of the Tao Te Ching. So I will not give you a translation or anything like that. I will give you a few translations I will talk about, but that is basically it. The irony is, and that is where part of the problem comes from, Lao Tzu talks about that you should lead a simple life, that simplicity helps you to understand reality. Reality is usually complex, and by keeping your things simple, not to simplify things, but to keep things simple, you can understand what the things actually mean. That means that, for instance, if you don't lie, and if you do not steal, and if you do not create guilt, and if you do not talk too much, all these kind of things that you also find in Christianity and in Islam and stuff like this. You keep your life simple, and if you don't have too many ambitions, your life stays simple, and as a result of that, you might come to understand life. At the end of the Tao Te Ching, in chapter 80, he describes that the ideal society for Taoists would be a small village where everybody who lives in the village basically knows each other and they share everything. There's no weapons in the village. They could hear the sounds from another village, but they would never have a need to go there, because if they would not be self-sufficient enough. So in a way you can say that modern communalism, people who try to be self-sufficient, they live more or less along Taoist lines, except the fact is that if you live in these kind of lines, you also gradually have inbreeding, and that is a big issue. So there has to be some exchange between villages to keep the blood between people alive, so that people do not become stupid. I read somewhere that the first interpretation of the Tao Te Ching was done by a group of Chinese scholars who were serving at the court of Charles the Great, but I haven't found my text material back from my history of the Tao Te Ching that I wrote a long time ago, so I cannot give you the exact details for that. But maybe you know, and you can put them in the commentaries. When you look at translations, you see that the first translations, there was for instance one in 1942 in France by Mr. Julien, and there were in 1886, do I say 1842, and 1868 by John Halmers, who also made a translation and he was a Protestant priest. And this is one of the issues that we have with many translations, is that they are rooted in the Christianizing thought, or the need to Christianize by priests, Protestants, Catholics, and so on and so on. And they wanted to look for value for Christianization of Chinese, and their interpretation was therefore always colored by that thought. And that is, of course, a big issue. In 1968, Chalmers, when he wrote about the daodejing, he called the text the speculation on metaphysics. When we look at the history of the daodejing, something else is going on, because at that moment you can see there are like 3 different kind of histories of the daodejing. There are more, but let's keep it simple for a change. First of all, in excavations from these last 50 to 80 years, they found gradually through wangbi, Godian and other places that the history of the daodejing is complex, and that rich people would have teachers who taught them about spirituality, how to live well, and so on and so on. And these people, the fangshi, they would write slips with wisdoms to study, and they would be compiled in bamboo rolls, and these bamboo rolls would then be basically individualized daodejings. As a result of that, we now know that there were many different kind of versions of the daodejing at the time when we usually consider the daodejing to be written. We can also speculate from there that there was no specific writer of the daodejing, but there were compilers, and they made choices probably based on the amount of slips, sometimes maybe on the base of the content, and so on. So this is the historical reality of the daodejing. Then there is the Taoist reality of the daodejing, and there are basically 2 versions that history brought to us. And one was the heshang version, and the other one was the wangbi version. These were 2 commentators who commented on the daodejing and gave a particular kind of interpretation. The wangbi interpretation is usually used by Taoists, so that's very interesting. The heshang translation is not so much used by Taoists, but still it is very popular. The Confucians also usually look at the wangbi, and some people, they look at both of them, and they both give different kind of commentaries. And it's very interesting to look at them together, and as far as I know, only Wagner has compared wangbi and heshang in his text, and that is from State of New York University Press. When you look at these interpretations, you see that they tend to speculate on other things. Wangbi, very special kind of interpreter. I mention him more often. He, on a very young age, reinterpreted the I Ching and the daodejing and some other works. And then at 27, 28 or something like this, he died. So he had a very short life. And in that sense, for many Taoists, wangbi is like a big cultural hero, because he was in the world to do his thing. When he was ready with his thing, he died. A Taoist appears in the world. When he's ready, he disappears. So he doesn't take credit, he just goes away. That is what you also read in the daodejing. As a result of the difference between history and Taoism, for a long time as a scholar and as a Taoist at the same time, I had okay, so which one should I actually believe? Which one is valid? But eventually it is about the teachings of Taoism, and it is the reality of history. And these things, they can exist next to each other. It is important to understand that the Tao Te Ching can best be explained to you by a Taoist, and not so much by just reading the Tao Te Ching. That is very important, because the Tao Te Ching, like the I Ching, these are books of learning, and they have to help you create guidance into the world, and to make sure that you live in accordance to the rules of nature, basically, which is then called, of course, Tao. That is both the creation process and as well as maintenance of nature as a whole. And we are part of it, so that's important. Well, dear friends, this is the end of this part of the investigation of the Tao Te Ching. I will be back in the next video for the second part, because I still have a lot of things to tell about it. The Tao Te Ching is comprehensive, you can say, and you need a long time to really understand it very well. I'm very happy that you have been concluding this video and that you have been watching the video all the way to the end. And if you haven't done yet, please give me a like, make sure you become a member from the group, and if possible also join our Patreon. At the moment when you join our Patreon, you have a lot of different kind of benefits. You can also study Chinese medicine with me, or you can just study Tai Chi Chuan or qigong or yoga in our online classes every week. And you will pay about $1 or €1 per lesson or something. Somebody calculated for me one time, because of the many lessons inside the package. So that is a very attractive thing. When you have questions, make sure you put them below so that I can answer your questions. You can also message me directly on my WhatsApp. When you become a member, that is automatically revealed to you, of course, because then you can be added to the group where we can have all kind of discussions and talks about these kind of subjects. When you have an interesting topic for me to talk about, I will definitely add it to my list. I don't have a waiting list for things. If you make me enthusiastic, I will definitely put it forward on the list, because I have so many topics to talk about. Chinese medicine, Daoism, Wudang Kung Fu, it is all very extensive as a topic, and I really look forward to share all these things with you, and also to learn from you, of course, in return. And together we can build a great community, and we can make a change in the world. And this is all what we do it for, because we are not satisfied. This is why we study these kind of things. At least I think you can agree with me on that. I look forward to see you in the next episode, and thank you for watching this one. And don't forget, the next episode is even more interesting than this one.